There we go.
Right. Para siempre, hermano.
Siempre, good to see you, bro.
All right. Excellent. Well, listen, thank you for joining us. We're going to kick this off now, almost 2 minutes in, and get this going. So we've got about 20-something brothers already on. We had about 50 registered, so I imagine a bunch more are going to join us. But let's just kick this off. For the webinar, and you know this, Manu, every entrepreneur has to have belief and conviction about their idea, their solution, the problem that they're trying to solve, and very few are able to, build out the infrastructure, hire the team, achieve product market fit, and frankly, raise the capital to execute on that vision. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so for those that don't know, as we have others can continue to join, my name is Jason Torres. I am the chair of SCF, Service and Education Fund. We are the partner of the fraternity. They're a philanthropic partner. And so welcome everyone to our webinar on raising capital as an entrepreneur. Before we begin, just a couple housekeeping items. We have polls, chats, and Q&A. So we will have a Q&A session at the end. Make sure that, if there's a topic, discussion, burning question, just kind of throw it up. We'll be monitoring that. Make sure we address any burning questions that are on your mind, and we'll get to everything. But today we have Hermano Manu Smadja. Used to be known as Frenchie, but Manu now. And he's the co-founder and CEO of Empower Financing. He's going to tell us about his experiences and how he continues to navigate the numerous pitfalls on this journey called entrepreneurship. But first, what chapter and year did you pledge?
Sure. So I come from Alpha Epsilon AE, University of Virginia, and Spring 01. So I'll be celebrating my 20 years at frat next spring, which is crazy. Time flies.
Wow. Okay. And so now you were born in France and you ended up at the University of Virginia. How does a Frenchman end up at UVA of all the places on earth?
It's a little random. So, I was born and raised in France. It's not my fault I was born that way. Don't hold it against me. But I came to UVA at the age of 17, and I came as an international student. And like a lot of international students, I didn't have a lot of data points to make my decision. So I got US News and World Report from like a friend of the family who sent me the magazine. There's no email at the time, or it was just beginning, at least in France. And I got the magazine in the mail. I wanted a public education in a school with very strong values. And so UVA was good value for money. It was the #1 public institution at the time. And it had a very strong set of Jeffersonian values. And, I thought, why not? Let's give it a shot. And they were crazy enough to let me in. So I took it.
Yeah.
And it was funny, actually, when I joined frat, a lot of brothers thought I was some exchange student, that I was there for like 6 months and I was going back to France, which made me pledging frat even crazier to them. It's like, we have this French kid who's there for 6 months and he just wants to be a hero, which made even less sense. So it was pretty funny at the time.
Wow, that's great. Okay. So how did you finance your education coming from outside the US? A lot of the typical avenues are not available to you.
Yeah, like a lot of students, and like my line brothers, I took a bunch of odd jobs. So I was a grader, a tutor for math, physics, computer science, French. I was even an indoor soccer referee. Like, you name it, I did it. I had the help of my family, which obviously helped quite a bit, and I managed to graduate. But that really planted a seed in my head. Why was it so hard? Why weren't banks lending to international students? And then my line brother, the ace on my line, Juan Carlos Lam, he was paying his meal plans on his credit card, right? So every semester he's putting like $1,000 or $2,000, I forget what it was at the time, on his credit card. at some crazy interest rate. And so again, like there's such a lack of financing available, not just for international students, but for students from low-income backgrounds. And that sort of stuck with me. After graduation, I went to work for Capital One in consumer finance and healthcare financing, actually, in Boston.
Got it. And how did you get connected to the fraternity?
It was my housemate was John Villalobos, and it's like the craziest story. Like my second UVA is a sort of bubble, not a sort of bubble; it's very much a bubble. And you have all these very wealthy international students, and you have all these, just overall the campus is beautiful, it's magical, but it's not reality. And about a mile and a half away from campus, there's this trailer park, and people were just waiting by phone booths for a job to do that day so that they could feed their family. And that contrast really like shocked me. And I came from a fairly modest background, so I didn't really fit into the traditional sort of wealthier international student crowd at UVA. And I always grew up also doing service, and I wanted to give back in a way. And so one day I'm on the computer, I'm looking at organizations on campus that are really making an impact, that are deep into service. And I get on the website of the La Unidad Latina, the local chapter, AE. And so I'm researching, I'm like, oh, these guys are cool. I should try to give them a call, because at the time we didn't text, we actually called people. And at the same time, my future line brother, my housemate at the time, John, gets home and he's like, yo, I just came back from like this craziest meeting. It's really cool. You got to check these guys out. And it's like, he just came back from like a smoker or like an advanced informational session with the founders at AE. And it was just like so weird that like literally the same day, the same evening, these two events sort of intersected. And I was like, well, I'm just on their website. I actually had a call just a second ago with their VP. So anyway, that's how I got into it. And I think everyone thought I was going to drop. Like everyone was like, well, where's this French dude? Like there's no obvious connection initially. But yeah, no, I obviously stuck with it and became involved with like the region, national council at some point, or alumni affairs down the line, and then spent some time in Europe. So I got a bit more disconnected, but came back to Frat about a decade ago.
And so you went and earned your MBA from INSEE. Can you talk a little bit about that? And is that where you created or got the idea for this business?
So yeah, I went to UVA undergrad, I did research, I did grad school, then I worked in Texas for a while, then I did Capital One in Boston, then worked in tech in Boston, then the financial crisis hit in 2008, 2009. At that point in time, I lost my job at Capital One, the whole division got shut down. And I had already applied to business schools. I got into INSEAD, went to INSEAD 10-month accelerated program, one of the best ranked ones in the world. I thought, great, I already went to grad school, this will be faster. After INSEAD, I got into McKinsey. I had to borrow a lot of money for INSEAD. I almost couldn't make it because I almost couldn't get a loan for graduate school. And I thought, this is crazy, I'm a French citizen, INSEAD's based outside Paris. I can't get a loan to come here. How much harder would it be if I was coming from a middle income background in India or China or Mexico or Brazil? And so I managed to pull through, but I had a lot of debt, and I took a job at McKinsey, and I ended up working in financial services, did quite well. McKinsey paid back half of my graduate student loans the day I joined as a sign-on bonus. So it was a huge weight off my shoulders. And ended up working there for 4 years. And then it sort of came full circle for me in late 2013. And it was full circle in that I started Empower because of a brother, because of an hermano at UVA who reached out on the server. He said the following, he said, hey guys, I'm $500 short on my rent this month. I'm going to get evicted and I'm thinking about dropping out of school. And that really shook me, because here we were 15 years after I'd experienced this challenge financially myself, and students were still dropping out of school. And this obviously hit close to home. At that time, I was back with McKinsey in DC, 2 hours away from my home. There's the student who was about to drop out, this brother. And so I sent him the money, but I thought, okay, how many more students are affected by this? How do we tackle this challenge once and for all? There's nothing that strikes me more at the core than like just a mind being wasted, and someone not being able to achieve their dreams because of money. And so that's how I got started. I couldn't get the idea out of my mind. So I always joke that I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I was doing fine at McKinsey. I was on the partner path. Like, you know, it was going to be big money eventually. And so I was happy, but I just couldn't stop thinking about this. And so I left McKinsey and created Empower. And for the first year and a half, I had zero salary. And so, you know, my friends and my family thought I was completely nuts. And, but it, you know, 6 years later, I would not want to do anything else.
Wow. So this is your why. This is like, okay, this is your problem. You've identified it, and I'm going to figure it out. And you just started. And so what was the first, once you made that decision, what did you do? You know, you just decided, I'm going to finance myself, my own living expenses, while I call in favors and start to build out a team. And what did you do next?
Yeah, I did a lot of things that when I was supposed to. I also did a lot of things that I probably wouldn't recommend. So for me, it felt like a calling. So I feel like I probably took more financial risk than I should have, right? So on the good side, because I'd worked at McKinsey for 4 years, they paid back my debts, etc. I was not in a bad financial situation, so I could afford to not have a salary for about a year and some change, and did some side projects along the way to get by. Things I wouldn't recommend is I cashed in my retirement account, which is probably more risk than people have to take. I was humbled enough to know that I knew nothing about entrepreneurship. I came from a very cookie cutter, like Capital One, McKinsey background. And I teamed up with a friend of mine, to your point, from INSEAD, who became my co-founder, Mike Davis. And he was a serial entrepreneur. So he did all sorts of crazy things. He did a diapers.com clone in Chile, so like baby products in Santiago. Then he had some tech outsourcing business in India. He did a tampon subscription business. Like he's always done like some weird, but none of them picked up. Like none of them were home runs. And I always thought that part of it was because his heart wasn't there. Like there were things to make money. They weren't things that captured his heart. And I also knew that his dad was the dean of a university in Iran, and he came to the U.S. as a refugee during the Iranian Revolution. And you know, he had 45 minutes to escape the country. He grew up on social welfare in Iowa, out of all places. And at the age of 14, he made it to Purdue University. So he's like sort of like this prodigy, this genius who grew up with nothing in the U.S. Was essentially a king in Iran, right? Like grew up really wealthy in Iran, but grew up without anything. You know, his dad worked at a maximum security prison as a librarian. His mom cut hair for a living, like a very typical immigrant or refugee story. And education was close to his heart. Education is why he was able to make money, go to INSEAD and so on later on. And so I knew that what I was doing would resonate with him. And I also knew that I needed his skill set on the team. And so I talked to him about it. We were good friends. He immediately jumped in, to his credit. Like he didn't think about it twice. Like it really gripped him, and he moved forward with it. And so the two of us went at it after this crazy idea. And we built an advisory board. Again, we knew very little. And so we surrounded ourselves with mentors. And what was really important also is we created an accountability system. So every month we'd have a session with the advisory board to tell them like how much progress we'd made or not made. We would ask for their guidance on various things, introductions and so on. We had a newsletter that went out every month, again, as an accountability system. We wanted to get a lot of traction, and we didn't want, these were all people we admired on the board of advisors and people on the list. And so we didn't want to be in there. So it was another like social incentive to make progress. And then, I got to give credit to Frat. Frat was from day one was supportive, right? So I'm thinking like investors, like some brothers put in money. Some brothers like Walter Vieira is like my CPA and like has helped from day one when we didn't have any money. And so he still helped with my taxes and everything. We have Hermanos who helped with the legal aspect of things. Like they were just, willing to give me half an hour, 5 hours of their time to say like, hey, you should do this or not structure things this way. We have brothers like Jesse Mejia or Pedro Santana who helped with like the university network and helped sort of shape my thinking around what it would take to partner with universities. We have Hermanos who were early customers, right? And when we were just like one shitty website, they're willing to take a bet on us. So we have Hermano Tom Cruise, who's like one of, I think, our first 10 borrowers. I don't know if he knows that, but he's one of our early customers, and he helped be another proof point for us.
Wow. And so now, so you have some hermanos who came in, and this is really just, I guess this is just friends and family, right? That's come in terms of, and that was, is that a couple $100K? Is that a couple million? Like, what does that look like?
I wish I had friends and family that with a couple million. Yeah. So, this is where, being from an immigrant background, it puts you sort of like at a major disadvantage, right? It's a privilege to be an entrepreneur, and it's very much an old boys club, right? So it's, a lot of the sons of doctors and lawyers going to Stanford, right? And being able to tap into dad and mom's network that get a leg up. When you're an immigrant, it can be a bit more challenging in the early stages, especially. Like down the line, once you have traction and everything, and you got Sequoia behind you, it's not an issue anymore. But to get started, it's a real hurdle. Thankfully, I reached out to friends, family, mentors, frats. And so some of the initial investors, we raised $107,000, right? Which is a really small angel round by any standard, but it helped us. We were a team of 2 with 1 intern. This was plenty of money for us to get the initial platform built, to get some traction, try on some school partners. With that budget, we managed to get Harvard as a partner, build an initial platform, make some initial loans. So we were really on a shoestring. And that money, it came from, some friends and some mentors, so like colleagues. I reached out to McKinsey colleagues. Counterintuitively, it wasn't the directors or the partners who invested. It was some of the associates or the engagement managers, some of the more junior people who really invested in me as a friend, more so than anything else. It was Hermanos who actually even volunteered. They heard the story, it resonated with them. They're like, you know what, let me put like $10, $15, $25,000 in this. It was some dude I met at a coffee shop who was passionate about something similar. We had a friend in common who was like, you know what, let me put money in this. It was a mentor of Mike's professors. We had an INSEAD professor who put some of the early money. So that's how we really started in that first round. And actually, if I have one regret, is I wish we had a lower valuation for that first round, because I wish I'd given them even more shares of the company. Right? These early people, they're really like the ones that help you take off. And so I hope that one day when we have a big exit, I can give them more upside, because they were critical.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much power in belief. It's actually enabling. And then what happens is you believe more in the idea because it's validation. And especially when it's from your peers, as opposed to an institution, which is a little bit disconnected from the problem. Right. And so it's humbling. And I think that you're spot on. I mean, it is a privilege to be an entrepreneur. I mean, it's a noble thing to do that. And especially as an immigrant who really had to sort of come up, in that problem and really living it. So, all right. So you have this capital, you have there's 2 of you, and there's an intern, and then you start getting, and that pays for basically just living expenses, keeping the lights on, getting the systems that you need to be able to now have this platform to give loans. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it gave us the initial traction. We have this is early 2015. Through some crazy set of coincidences, we were able to get Harvard as a partner. And that in itself is probably another half-hour chat on how that even came about. We reached out to 25 universities, and not only did they turn us down, they didn't even respond. They're like, we were so far below the mark that it's like, it was not even worth the, it's probably like spam, like, oh, this is an idiot. Like, I'm not even going to respond to him. But Harvard came through. And so in early 2015, we have Harvard, we have an initial platform. We've done 7 test loans, one of which is my own sister, because that was the very first loan, because when we started, we needed to do a test loan with someone who we knew wouldn't sue us. And so that's how my sister came up. And I was going to pay for her education anyway. So that's how that happened. So we have that. We have this intern who, now that we've raised $107,000, we can pay a proper stipend to. And now it's time to raise money so that we can actually have a good lending season, a good summer 2015, spring and summer 2015 with Harvard. And we do that. And I think you asked at some point about the role of accelerators. We got into the Village Capital Accelerator, not a huge brand name, but actually a very decent one that punches above its weight in the impact space. Yep. And so they helped us, revise our pitch. I had horrible slides, very busy, data-driven, McKinsey-type slides. And that's not what you need when you're pitching an investor, because it's all about the narrative. It's all about the story. It's all about the crazy size of the market and the technology, not about like fitting 300 charts into one slide and presenting to a CFO. It's very different. So Village Capital really helped us with that. And we quote unquote won the accelerator, which meant that they invested in us. They were the first institutional money in Empower. And then one thing led to another. And I got on the phone one day with this one guy who runs a lending business and is a multimillionaire, had done well in student lending and really loved what we were doing. And so he provided us with a line of credit to $3 million to make the first set of loans. As well as $250,000 for equity, right? So again, this is like the $107,000. It helped us pay salaries, build the tech, etc. So between him, Village Capital, and then to my co-founder Mike's credit, I came again from a cookie cutter background, right? Where you have a problem, you like break it down, top down, like who are the VCs? Let me just go and speak with all of them, and that was a disaster. Like I didn't get a single VC. VCs always want to talk to you when you're starting off. Like they always say, oh, we do early stage. And you think, well, early stage is seed stage. Early stage is really series A, right? Unless you're some like state of the art AI, big data, like unless you have all the buzzwords in what you do and legitimately VCs are going to want to talk to you, but they want to invest in you. So I completely failed at raising any money at the seed stage. Meanwhile, my co-founder Mike is the opposite, right? He's all like bottom up. So he'd just go to a bar, speak with 3 dudes, and by the end of the night, he's raised $25,000, right? In a couple nights of drinks like that. And he got individual investors who would put in $100,000, right? I didn't even think of anyone could put $100,000 into a startup. But there's a lot of people who have quite a bit of money to invest out there. And so with the 2 of us combined and this accelerator, this other institutional investor, we raised $1.1 million in the seed round. And that allowed us to start having a bit more than a stipend. So we had the beginning of a salary. We had more money to invest in tech. We had money to start making the loans because we had that $3 million line. We had money to pay lawyers. Lawyers are freaking expensive. And so you need money for your counsel. We had money to hire and expand the team. And we joke that we actually had money to get an office with doors. Before that, we were on an open floor plan at a sort of WeWork type space. And when you're speaking with schools and there's the guys from General Assembly like screaming 2 tables later, like 2 tables away, it's a bit distracting and it can be a mess when you're making those sales calls. So it was nice to have doors.
Wow. And so this all happened in what sort of period of time? So from the time you have your 107K, then you have your team, your intern, you have this traction with Harvard, and then you have this high net worth individual who says, all right, I'll put a little bit into your company, but I don't really want to be the capital that you're lending. We want to use your algorithm effectively to identify these high impact credit-worthy immigrants that aren't credit-worthy in the U.S. just because it doesn't fit neatly into the platform. And then after that, you have effectively the seed round from Village Capital and I guess a bunch of other high net worth. Is that sort of the path?
Yeah, that's absolutely the path. And I see on the question someone's asking, how did we approach these people, meaning the investors, and how were shares decided? It's a great question. So it sort of starts with your own network, and it can be super awkward. Right? I was not used to raising money at all, and so I really sucked at it initially, because like asking people for money is just if you come from the corporate world, it's usually not something you ever have to do. My co-founder was really comfortable with it, and because he'd done it a bunch before, so he even asked his own sisters to invest money, and his sisters put like 5K or 10K, but it was a meaningful chunk of the 107. And so then I got little by little more comfortable. I did a lot of the pitching sessions, which are okay for raising money, but which are great for PR, because then all of a sudden, there's some fund that has your video on their website or some other accelerator. So that helped a lot. And then you can reference, I was at this event, like look at this online pitch. It looks like you have traction. It's something you put in your monthly newsletter. And so it's a lot of word of mouth. It's a lot of trial and error. My personal breakthrough on fundraising was when I pitched to Baltimore Angels, which kind of sounds like a baseball team, but it was the Angel Group of Baltimore. And, I show up and it's like 8 people are pitching. So 8 other CEOs or co-founders like me that day. And, they all say the same thing. It's a big market. They go into the slides. Everyone has a PowerPoint. It's a big market. This is like the hockey stick for financials. We're going to grow exponentially. This is the team with like 50 degrees on the team. And there's a PhD advisor, blah, blah, blah. So everyone has the same thing. One thing I did differently there is I feel like I really pushed on the authenticity. Like it was clear, I think, for me versus some of the others, that it really came from the heart. I pushed on the theatrics as well. So, I got on stage, I grabbed the clicker. Everyone was expecting me to start going through my presentation. I just slam it on the table, and I'm like, hey guys, before we even get started, let me tell you why I'm here and why I'm doing this. And from then on, like I could see like people were really leaning in and paying attention. And I had won them over at that point in time. Like people were like, okay, well, this guy, it resonated with anyone who was an immigrant in the room, anyone who believed that like people have different cards when they're born, but everyone should be given equal opportunity. Anyone who was an entrepreneur themselves, anyone who valued education, or his husband or wife was a teacher, etc. Like anyone who could even remotely relate to the mission, like put in money that day. And that gave me a lot of confidence, because I didn't really raise much money before that. So that helped. And then in terms of shares, so that the second part of the person's question, of Luis's question, the way to set it up is it's really based on who your lead investor is. Sometimes you don't have a lead investor, which is what happened for us in the seed round. We had a bunch of people who were interested, and no one really wanted to be a lead. So we just sort of set up an arbitrary template with our lawyers, like Cooley, and we just said, okay, the price is X, right? It's going to be a convertible note. There's no cap, so there's no real price to be set, because price is usually divisive. Like no one ever says, oh, this price makes me want to invest more, right? It's either neutral or it's a reason not to invest. So the further out you can push price discussions, the better. So we just said, here's a convertible note. You're going to get a 20% discount to the next round, the Series A. And that helped. For the Series A, though, the price was set by the lead. We had an idea of what we wanted, but we nicely landed sort of at the intersection, but it was a negotiation, and the lead set the price.
Yeah. And what was it about that pitch that made those investors want to come in?
People gravitate, I think, towards stories and narratives. They want to be part of a story. And I think that was important for me to understand. Like before that, I'm sort of like a very basic engineer. So I always thought, well, people want to invest in something where like the numbers all like make sense and add up. And that's true. But people don't invest in numbers, right? People invest in stories they believe in, and they want to be, it's almost like they're paying money to be part of something, to belong to a narrative, and they want to belong to your narrative. And so they wanted to be part of empower this sort of like student lending revolution that would help students who are left out of traditional financing. And so I think that's what I was selling, and that was important for me to understand. And so then it became about, telling them about the students we were helping, what challenges they were seeing, how they were succeeding, how they were making a difference in turn in society. Less so about, some of the early numbers we had, although those helped. And there's different kinds of investors. There's some that are like extremely on the analytical side, and then there's some that are analytically minded, but they make a decision with their heart and their gut first, which I think is the majority of people. And then they justify it with the numbers.
Right. They shoot the arrow and then draw the target around it. Bullseye.
It is, yeah.
So, wow. Okay. All right. So you really pulled at the heartstrings and you connected with them in a real way of, okay, these are the people who we're helping. Yeah, this is the platform, but this is how lending is done. It's antiquated. It's broken. This is how we're going to fix it. And this is the ultimate impact that we're having. These are the people. These are their stories. Then that you've made that connection as to, okay, not only am I going to get a return, but this is the right thing to do and the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So now you're up and running. And what's there had to have been dark days and uncertainty and doubt. And how do you get through that?
Yeah, there's every day is up and down. And even recently, right, COVID was a major hit, or even the government policies these days. Like every week is like some other challenge thrown in the press. So having a co-founder really helped, right? Because I think it balances you emotionally. It's hard to have both people down on any given day. So it was nice. One person would be down or angry or frustrated. The other person would be upbeat about something. And so when we were both down, it would be a really bad day. But other than that, so that helped. Having advisors helped. Taking it one day at a time. I think being a first-time entrepreneur, I think it was harder for me to manage my emotions. I think my co-founder, he'd sort of been there before, so he knew that these ups and downs are sort of part of the ride. For me, it was like, shit, is it always like this? Like some person like quits on you. An investor who's been sort of like warming you up the whole time is like, oh yeah, I'm going to put money at the last second, says, oh, you know what? No, sorry. Or actually just ghosts you altogether. Like this person you were counting on for $50 or $100 or $200,000 all of a sudden doesn't return calls. So yeah, you got to just roll with the punches, and just, it's a numbers game. I joke that it's like my dating strategy, right? Eventually there'll be a girl who like me. So it is important to keep that perspective, and take it one day at a time.
Yeah. You're building out your team. How did you go about that? Because it's very different when you and a co-founder and an intern versus now you have 40 something people, working in multiple countries now. I mean, how did you scale that? Typically the needs of the organization evolve, and hopefully the leadership evolves with it. So how do you think about that? That's been
the hardest part for me probably is the people side, right? Because it's challenging intellectually and it's challenging emotionally, right? So at some point I had to transition my co-founder, right? So about 2 years ago, so 4 years into the journey, a few things happened. On the personal side, my co-founder had his first kid, and now actually he's got his second kid. So he sequenced them pretty closely. And at the same time, he'd evolved. He was CTO when we started, and then he was sort of on the capital market side, so raising money for lending capital, right, to lend to the students. And he's a generalist like me. He was not a specialist in this space. And it became clear that 4 years in, he sort of was at capacity for what he was doing. He'd sort of reached like the level where we needed a specialist. We needed a very senior person in capital markets. And at the same time, we'd grown the team in DC. We'd opened up an office in Bangalore. He was alone in New York. His family situation changed. And so he transitioned to the board. And that conversation went well and smoothly, but I could imagine had he had a huge ego, or had there been like other forces at play, it would have been really difficult. But it was difficult for me. I was very anxious about the conversation and how that would go, because, if the tables were turned, I don't know that I would have taken it that well and been so open-minded about it. It's sort of your baby, and one day someone tells you like, oh, sorry, it probably doesn't make sense for you anymore to be an executive and work here day to day. And that day will happen for me too sometime. In terms of hiring people, the best thing we've done is we used to have a trial period where we'd hire people, and for the first month or so, it was sort of like non-committal on each side. A lot of people sort of fantasize and glorify startup world, right?
Yes.
They see like free food, ping pong tables, like super stock options. I think the most counterintuitive one is freedom and flexibility. They think like you're sort of your own boss in the startup world, and nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, we're super regimented at Empower. There's like a check-in at 8 a.m., check-out at 5 p.m. People are probably working till 7, 8, 9, 10 p.m. some days. We're always on Slack. We have like 20 different calls that are scheduled throughout the week. So there's like military sort of coordination. Because the role is very demanding, it's unlike a big corporation where you probably in your day you have 4 to 6 hours maybe that are demanding, and then the rest is a little more lax. Here it's like every single breathing hour you have, or waking hour. Hopefully you breathe at night too, but any given waking hour you're working. And so it's a very, I think people came in sometimes thinking, oh, I'm going to choose my hours, it's going to be like chill, etc. It's the opposite of that. It was good to have this trial period, and for both sides to be able to experiment. Some people also have really good resumes, but in practice, you put them in a situation like this, and they're not self-directed. They need a lot more structure. And so that was also good to see. Like we've had people who are like, they worked at law firms, like corporate law firms, et cetera. I'm like, oh, they're going to like really high IQ, like high achievers, et cetera. They're going to do really well here. And they didn't, because all of a sudden there's no sort of person over their shoulder to tell them, okay, these are the 5 clients you're going to work for, and this is what we expect from you. They had to figure out their own sort of KPIs, how they were going to contribute to the company. They had to report up to their boss and align. Their bosses or managers would have less time to work with them on a weekly basis because they themselves had a big workload, because no one can just afford to be just purely a manager. Usually the manager is a manager and a doer at the same time. So we learned by hiring people and having them do these trial periods. We got better at cycling faster. Like firing your first person on the team sucks, right? I never fired anyone before. To be frank, I never hired anyone before I participated in interviews at McKinsey or other places. But I'd never fired anyone. So that was a tough experience. And then you realize that, you're not sentencing someone to death, right? Like that person goes on, usually finds a job that pays even better. If you do it the right way, then you're also giving them a good severance or reference. You're helping them find another role. So there's ways to make this sort of a win-win. And then you're also giving someone else a chance, right? There's someone out there who's hungry, who's got the skills, who's a better fit for the company, and who deserves that shot. So that took me a while to learn and get comfortable with. Because again, I'm first-time CEO, but in a way I was a first-time sort of senior manager as well.
Yeah. I'd say that takes real EQ. And as someone who invests and backs entrepreneurs, that's one of the characteristics that I look for the ability to be self-reflective and recognize, recognize those items. So, for example, like, if it's done properly, a separation, where it's done with dignity and honor and respect, you actually don't burn that bridge. And just as organizations evolve, people's skills and how they relate to the organization, they also evolve, right? And so there may be a time where he or she is actually a very good fit for the organization. And if you've torched that relationship, well, then you can't go back there. And so it does take a real sensitive but disciplined approach to do that. So kudos to you, man. Really. Hey, we're getting a bunch of questions coming in. So when did how long did it take for the company to actually start making money? Like, how did you prove that out? Because you lend out the money and then they got to pay it back over some period of time. And, to kind of prove it out, to be able to get other people, well, one, that it works. And then two, to be able to get a bigger pool of capital to loan out. Like, now it works. Okay, now we can scale it up.
So a lot of questions. So we started making money 6 months into the company. And one of my mantras is, so you always hear on the West Coast, like, fail fast, right? Like, trial and error, etc. One of the things I was big on is learn from others' failures as well. Like, you don't have to try every single combination yourself, right? You can do A/B testing on what others have done and learn that way too. So we analyzed the hell out of what other companies were doing. And I was always obsessed with competitors or peers to see what they had tried at the sort of like org level, so with their teams, what they tried from a culture standpoint that they shared afterwards, or what they tried in terms of market or product. And so that was really informative. And one thing that was important for me is to make money soon, because we couldn't afford, again, back to sort of the underprivileged immigrant founder story, I didn't have the luxury of, dad lending me $1 million or something like that so I could run the company for a while and dick around. I needed to get results within 6 months. And so we're always focused on what's the next milestone, how do we get money in the door, etc. So our loans have small interest payments while in school. And that allowed us to show traction very quickly. We would show like, hey, we're receiving payments. People are on time on their first payments. It built credit history for the people we were lending to. And then it also made sure that the people we were lending to were not accumulating interest on top of interest. Because usually you get a school loan, you don't pay anything during school, and then you're like, wait, I borrowed like $30,000. Why do I owe $40,000 now? Well, it's because all your interest kept piling up while you were in school.
Right.
And so we didn't want that product. We wanted one where you're paying off your interest every month, even though that might mean like you need a job on campus, or mom and dad need to help in some way, or you need a lucrative internship here somewhere. So we made money quickly. And I saw there's a question on how big is the company now. We're 45. Thanks, Lauren, for that question. We're 45 FTEs today. We're backed by $200 million in loan capital. We work with 350 universities. So Harvard was the first one, and then it was sort of a domino effect from there. We've raised $30 million in equity. And I was telling Jason that, in the next 12 months or so, I'll probably be raising another $500 million or more on the debt side. We already got some of those term sheets, so it's just a matter of converting them now. So hopefully that helps on.
Talk a little bit about the distinction between debt and equity. So debt being actual for the loans, equity being a percentage ownership of your business.
Exactly. So this is a bit unusual as a startup. So in the usual startup, you do like an app or a pure tech business. You're just going to be raising, most of the time, you're just raising equity. So you're raising equity to pay for, your AWS, your Amazon Web Services, your team, your office space, whatever administrative fees you have, marketing, and so on. In Empower's case, not only do we have to raise that, but on top of that, we have to raise debt all the time, because we have to have separate capital that we can lend out. You don't want to use equity for that because it's a whole lot of money, right? It's $200 million that we're lending out. So that would be a shit ton of equity. And it would dilute the investors like crazy. Investors would not be happy. So we have to raise that separately, that loan capital. And then we have to raise some equity or some venture debt to make things even more complicated to co-invest in the loans we make. And again, over time, we initially were using equity for co-investment. Now we use venture debt or mezzanine financing. So then it gets into the financial engineering, and it's more specific to Empower. So I don't know if I want to bore the audience of Hermanos with that, but yeah, it makes me like constantly fundraise essentially, because that's my job. I just got to supply the company with enough resources that we can scale.
Yeah. Yeah. Jumping back to team, let's talk about tech. How did you think about tech and building out the tech stack? What did you have in-house? What did you outsource? How do you think about that?
Great points. When we started, so my co-founder was CTO, and he'd built a few tech services companies. So he had at least a good basis. We outsourced everything. We hired a team in Uruguay that he had worked with before, and they built the initial platform. They were cheap, which meant that there was a lot of bugs, and it was sort of subpar, and they didn't have a designer, neither for UX nor UI, nor really anyone that could put the wireframes together. So we were blessed to have this Hermano, actually. So the first hire we had was an Hermano, Will Hernandez. And he was supposed to be a designer, but he was a designer. He was in charge of our newsletter. He put the wireframes together. He probably did some coding as well. So, he's one that was like massively underpaid for everything he brought to the table. And, hopefully one day the shares we gave him were worth a lot of money to compensate him for everything he put in. He was a huge help. That's how we got started. We use the Google suite of products. You try to get things off the shelf that are cheap when you're starting, and then you probably have to redo it a year or two later on when you have more money. And so that's essentially what's happened. The one thing that somewhat was constant is we use Salesforce.com early on, and we're probably stretching what Salesforce.com is supposed to be or do, because we use it for like investor relations. We use it as our decisioning platform. Like we've built custom stuff to make the credit decisions. We use it for marketing partners. We use it to track any volume. So most of the reporting that we have at the company is done in Salesforce. The only thing that's not in there today is sort of our costs, like the financial cost side of things. Other than that, pretty much everything's in Salesforce.
Okay. So what's the future for Empower? What's the goal? You thinking about, caps? You want to, what's next? Yeah. What's next for Empower? What's next for you?
So for Empower, we're constantly expanding. I saw a brother who I think half jokingly was asking, can we refinance his loans? We just launched a refi product. So we're launching more products because students are coming to us, right? They're coming. We're the number one lender for international students in North America, meaning in the US and Canada, but also for DACA students. And so I think what I'd love to do in the future is finance more DACA students, and we're trying to forge more partnerships there. Launch more financial products in general, because these students, whether DACA or international, a lot of times they're lacking basic financial services, like meaning they don't always have, especially for international students, they don't have a bank account when they come over. They have a shitty health insurance that's imposed by their school and they overpay for. They don't have an easy way to send money back and forth between their home country and the US. So all these things are things they ask us for guidance on. And so we can create partnerships or even white labels some of these solutions. We've expanded to international students who go to schools in Canada. And the next big market for us is Australia. So there's a lot of international students going to Australia. We'd love to work there. And then for me personally, I think, the next 3 to 5 years is more of the same, just scaling the company, building a great leadership team. Hopefully at some point we raise enough capital that, I don't do this full time, but I focus more on culture, coaching, strategic direction of the company. But for now, it's down in the trenches. I'm very passionate about the product. I don't have as much time to spend on the product, but would love to at some point. So that's that. There's a question I think someone's asking, which is a great question. Like, should every new startup consider raising capital? Is it necessary with technical founders? one is there's a lot of models that are different and that are available out there, right? And I think if you can create a company that's cash flow positive from the start, or that gets to a decent enough amount of revenue or profit soon, go for it. Not everything is meant to fit the Silicon Valley mold. And so, you have like a few like tech startups that are just all like this, and you just throw a bunch of capital, you try to grow as fast as you can. But for one that succeeds that way, there's like another 9 or 10 that crash and burn. And so there's a lot of thoughtful people out there that say like, hey, that model is not healthy. You put a lot of pressure, mental pressure on the team. You put a lot of capital at risk, right? Because you end up with a sort of all or nothing result. And then you end up with business models like Uber or some of the food delivery startups that are like losing money on every single ride or delivery. So I would say, no, it's not necessary. It depends what you personally want, right? Do you want a lifestyle business? Do you see your product or what you're doing sort of as a niche that can grow, but probably is not a future $1 billion+ company? Or do you see this as like something that's going to take you a year, 2 or 3 to get off the ground, is going to be somewhat capital intensive, but then is the next Facebook or the next Uber? And I think those are very two different choices. And do you personally want to be working 80 to 100 hours a week and potentially crash and burn? Or do you want to manage your hours a bit differently, but also maybe not have the higher financial rewards? So it's a big personal trade-off. And I think if you were starting during COVID, what we have done differently, I think focus on profitability even more is sort of what a lot of VCs are asking companies now. So I don't know that for us, it was always the case. There's people talk about unicorns and camels. So unicorns is like grow, become a $1 billion company as soon as possible. The camel is, it can stay in the desert without water for, I forget how long. So it's sort of low resource, resilient, fight your way through the desert. So I think that model is very valuable and is getting a lot of praise. Yeah. I think there's a book called Out Innovate from this guy called Alex Lazaro. So in case you guys are interested, let me see if I can. Okay. On that topic, it talks about different models that are out there.
I'm going to rapid fire a few more questions that we have in the Q&A box. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So in this COVID environment with this new virtual distance learning, how do you think that's going to impact the future of financing?
How is COVID going to impact the future of financing? It's a big question, and I don't know that I have a big answer for it. I can answer with what we're seeing at Empower, which is a lot more people. A few things. One is a lot more people are needing financing. So we've seen a surge in demand because mom or dad lost their job, or because mom and dad's small business in Brazil or India is not doing as well, and therefore they don't have as much money to put into their daughter or son's education, so they need to borrow. So a higher need for financing is the first sort of takeaway. I think it's going to propel digital financing. So in a time of COVID, you're not showing up at your bank branch, if the bank branch is even open, with mom and dad, ready to co-sign a bunch of things and interact with the branch manager. That's a safety risk that you can't take, health risk you can't take. So you're going online on your smartphone. At a time of COVID, specifically for my business, it sort of puts into question what you do with your job versus education. So education is counter-cyclical. When people are losing their jobs left, right, and center, they don't necessarily jump to the next job. They might go back and get a grad degree. I think that's good for them. And it's also good for Empower in this case, because that means that there's more people who need to borrow for graduate school. And I'm trying to see what else will be new for COVID. I think what's been interesting, and this is maybe already technical, but for those who followed, the PPP loans to businesses, right? So the Paycheck Protection Program that helped keep people employed, frankly, during this. There's been a lot of small fintechs, so a lot of digital lenders that were granted the right to make those loans, and some of them just like crushed banks, right? They did it like more efficiently, a much larger number. Like it was embarrassing to see like Bank of America and Wells Fargo try to navigate through this, and just like, Bank of America announced it like 3 days too early. Their website crashed. Wells Fargo was a similar like shit show. And so digital lenders, I think, did really well and proved that you can deploy these solutions much faster, and they're more reliable than big banks for these government programs. So I'm hoping that for fintech, that's a good proof point, and the government or other groups will work with fintechs more closely, and it'll take power away from banks. Not that banks are evil or anything, but they just don't. They're sort of stuck in the 20th century. Yep.
Okay, we're coming up on time here. We'll do another question or two, and then we'll wrap up. Unless you have a few extra minutes where folks can we can go through this Q&A. But what was the most effective marketing avenue that you employed to really get the word out and promote that this is even available?
Word of mouth helped a lot. I think back in the day, 6 years ago, I emailed the LUL Open listserv. That also helped. What worked? We tried Facebook and Google, and it failed miserably back then. Universities were our main channel. Universities and word of mouth. When you're starting, it's the last sort of piece of advice that I learned the hard way is do things that don't scale. Right? Like everyone sort of sees like Uber and everything and all the digital marketing, et cetera. And they're thinking like, oh, this is going to work great from the start. In reality, when you're starting, you don't need 10,000 customers. You need like 5 or 10 really good ones that are going to give you feedback, tell you what sucks about your product, and everything sucks when you're starting. So it's normal. So don't get your ego hurt. And so getting my sister or Tom Cruise or some of these other individual folks to take our product and then tell us like what worked for them, what didn't, try to feel their pain point. That was really helpful. Going to speak at universities or to individual students was really helpful.
Align the NDAs. How strict are you with NDAs when presenting a project? That's a question from Ron Castro.
NDAs are not very enforceable. So it's sort of like the way I see it is it's almost like, I don't know if you guys are martial artists. I did judo for like a decade. So I always remember my sensei at some point, you bow, right? And one question was like, oh, when you bow, do you keep your eyes up to look at the other person? And the sensei was like, if you need to keep your eyes up when you bow, you don't bow, right? Because then they strike you. Like it's not worth it. I think the analogy is the NDAs are the same way. The NDAs formalize a handshake, but if you're not comfortable with the other party, don't even do business with them, because the NDA is not what's going to help you. And by the way, VCs on the West Coast have a code of honor that they don't do NDAs and they keep everything quiet, etc. My experience is actually that code of honor is not very well respected. So share with them, but share the minimum initially, right? Like progressively share more, because you have to share something. And so, you can have 3 versions of your deck. You sort of have like a 6-slide version, you have a 15 slide version, and then you have like the data room with everything the person would ever want to know. And if you sequence those, that should generally do the trick. And then the other thing I'd say on this is a lot of people are protective about their ideas. And I would say don't be. Like ideas are dime a dozen. What's really valuable is the execution, the team you build around it, the systems, and so on. So, share your idea widely and then see who's attracted to it. And that person is either a supplier, an investor, a partner, someone who's going to join your team. So those are, and again, just my opinion and thoughts here. I'm not an authority on the topic.
How can Hermanos learn more about Empower, and how can they reach you?
So good question. So they can learn about Empower on the website, or if they Google Empower, we have a bunch of YouTube videos and other materials. And then they can reach me anytime. I'll share my email here. It's pretty easy. It's manu@empowerfinancing.com. All panelists and attendees.
Great. So with that, listen, we want to thank you for everyone for attending. You can reach, you have the information to reach Hermano Manu, and then SCF is www.lulsef.org. I'll put that in the chat. We're always looking for donors and people to support our work of amplifying Hermano's efforts in this space of education and in service and philanthropy. And so we've already done a bunch of events where we've supported schools, charter schools, boys club. We've hosted a number of webinars around distance learning, as well as caring for an elderly. So that's the work that we're doing, and we're going to continue to do. This week we have tomorrow how to get internships. So we've partnered up with SEO to host a seminar for our undergrad hermanos, so they can transition smoothly and really jumpstart their careers. And then we have on Thursday with families and the children of our hermanos. We're working with the People's Improv Theater, so they can work with your kids in developing their skills around creativity and public speaking. And then on Friday we have our Know Your Rights seminar. So we've got a detective, we've got a public defender, as well as a former prosecutor, to really give and unpack the different aspects of what your rights are, what's black, what's white, and what's the gray area. And so when interacting with police. But again, please consider making a donation and join me in thanking Hermano Manu. Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful story. We're with you, and we will talk soon.
Siempre, hermanos.
Siempre.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Don't hesitate to reach out. Ciao, ciao.